Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the 2-hour chart provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. A couple of things here. The trend line that I was watching very carefully is breaking down. You can see it's breaking down. It started to tick down below the line here and came up, and then again, and then we got finally a fairly firm break. Now, it did not plunge like I was expecting it to, which is very encouraging. Well, it's not encouraging for those of you who are looking for an opportunity to stack, but it's encouraging for those of us who are looking for the price to rise. So it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other. But anyway, it's shown some kind of strength. Now, I expected this sort of thing to happen when we got into this congestion area, because the area to 34 to from 34 to 36, between 32 and 36, there's a lot of congestion. I'll show that to you when I pull out here. The other thing of note is this descending MACD line. You can see we're down below the negative on the MACD, but obviously the price has not responded as negatively as the MACD has. Our lows, you can see the lows in the MACD, big low there, but we went lower, big low there, but we went lower, big low there, and then we've just gone higher. So I still think that this area is looking like a transitionary phase to back to the bull market. I'm expecting a correction with the break of this trend line, but I cannot say how low it will go. We could very easily turn up from this breakdown here below the zero line and just head up. We've had very little upward movement above the, in the positive. So as we pull out farther, you can see I'm going to show you the congestion area that we have in this 32 to 36 area. As we get into this area, you can see right here, back in May and July and June and through the summer, we did a lot of trading back and forth in this area. Then we made a run to try to get back into new highs, and then we had the huge September smackdown. So we're trying to build back into that area, and we're still looking for this price, 36. That's the key price. If we can get a turn up and penetrate 36, we may be off to the races. But if we continue down, we may cross the zero line. If you're looking to stack, you're looking for one of these big monster blowout crashes and looking to lock in a low price. Hopefully for your sake you get that. If you believe in the fundamentals in silver, then it's really just considered a gift, because obviously silver, in my opinion and in many other people's opinion, is undervalued by a factor of 10. I think possibly silver's actually undervalued by a factor of 100. So eventually we believe that silver is going to absolutely skyrocket, and when it does, then of course the public is going to rush to get on board. So we have our curious double bottom type of formation here, which I've never seen before. And maybe it will hold. That would be a very unique situation. If it did end up holding and we ran to the moon from there, it would end up looking something like this down here, which obviously you can't even see because it's so irrelevant now. So that's quite possible. The other chart I wanted to look at real quick is the Japanese yen. I have been contending that we may be looking at some type of central bank intervention, but it certainly has been the quiet type, if that's the case. We had a fairly strong rally off of the 76 bottom. It seems that 76 is the line in the sand for the bankers. The volume really doesn't indicate central bank intervention. We've had some good spikes, but it seems that the traders are a little bit afraid to sell the dollar below 76 yen at this point. So I'm kind of up in the air as to whether I think the central banks are intervening, but I think that everybody is worried that there is a 76 line in the sand. You can see when we go farther out that the Fukushima low, well, we don't have that, but it was back in March. that was this big crash in the value of the dollar against the yen. And now we're just kind of deciding whether that area is going to hold or whether we're going to go down. So keeping a very close eye on the Japanese yen. That's very important. I want to take you over to the main topic of the night, and that's really very controversial. I didn't mean it to be. I'm surprised that it is so controversial. It's an article that I wrote this morning called Greek Bailout Theater of the Absurd. And I really find it shocking. I guess maybe I'm not in touch with people or something. I really don't understand it, so maybe you can explain it to me. But I really don't understand how someone can defend throwing Molotov cocktails at the police. You can see this guy, his face is injured. He's on fire. He's just some kid who works for the police, and he's trying to maintain order as these quote-unquote anarchists are out there lobbing Molotov cocktails. Now, I wanted to dig into the Greek situation. I did in this article, and you can see from the comments, obviously, that it generated quite a bit of controversy. I think that maybe the Europeans' experience with socialism, and of course our experience now as we begin to become more socialist and even potentially communist, is that maybe they don't understand. I'm not really sure why they respond the way they do. I had quite an exchange with an anarchist who was trying to explain that what's going on is they want to overthrow the government, and that's why the anarchists are supporting this violence. I really don't understand it. I'm definitely not an anarchist. I believe that we need government. We just need much, much less of it. And we certainly don't want to have government that takes from one person and gives to another. Whether that person is a banker or whether that person is a welfare mom, I really don't care. It is immoral, in my opinion, for the government to take the wealth at gunpoint from one person and give it to another. I don't have any problem with the government providing for roads. I don't have any problem with the government providing for even schools if they didn't have left-wing brainwashing in the schools. But I do have a problem with the government taking the wealth from one person and providing sustenance and living to another person. In my opinion, it's wrong. So we've got these people out in the streets in Greece that are rioting, and it's really about the cuts. And I wanted to talk about the cuts. I really wanted to dig into the economics of it. But first of all, I wanted to dig into these numbers. In this article, I tried to point out the extreme situation we're talking about here. I think that Zero Hedge just posted an article today that said this has actually doubled this number here of $170 billion. And I tried to put that in perspective of the fact that there's only 11 million people in Greece. So if you made that comparison, it comes to $15,000 or so per person. If you wanted to do a comparison to the United States with its 312 million people, this type of bailout for the United States would be roughly $5 trillion. Okay. Now, when we calculate in the fact that Greece's GDP is roughly half of ours, then it's really a $10 trillion bailout. And now if this latest information from Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge is correct, that it's roughly twice that, then really we're talking about a $20 trillion bailout if we were talking about the United States. Now, you know, our debt is about 16 trillion. So really that would wipe out our entire national debt and put us to the good of about 4 trillion. Boy, I sure wish there was somebody out there who could do that for us. But obviously that's not the case. So I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the Greek figures here so that you can understand where I'm coming from. But before I do that, I wanted to look at one of the key authors on these types of things, and that's F.A. Hayek. He is actually by no means a radical anarchist libertarian. In fact, the libertarians have criticized him severely. He actually was sort of a moderate as far as that sort of thing goes. But He was very influential in the fact that he came up with this idea that, and this is an idea that I completely agree with, that socialism and fascism really have a lot more in common than they have differences, and that those two are ideas that are opposed to individualism, classical liberalism, and freedom. These are the ideas that the United States is based on. These are the ideas that the framers of the Constitution believed in. And it's my opinion that these are the ideas that made this the most wealthy and greatest nation on the face of the earth for a large part of the 19th, 20th centuries. So this is Hayek's contention. Hayek challenged the general view among British academics that fascism was a capitalist reaction against socialism, instead arguing that fascism and socialism had common roots in central economic planning and the power of the state over the individual. So I completely agree with that idea. I want to expand that further. In my opinion, the reason why you are seeing this type of violence in Greece is because the power of the state has been built up to the point not only where it has become oppressive, and that's happening in the United States as well, but it is being relied upon by the people to support them. So they've come to the point where they're in a nanny state, and I'm gonna demonstrate some of those figures to you when we look at the statistics regarding Greece. So the first one I want to go to is the economy of Greece over at Wikipedia. Now, the key statistic I want to cite here, and you can go through all of these, they're very interesting. The first one, though, is actually the labor force. I wanted to point that out, okay? Because we're going to address that when we look over at the article about the cuts to the labor force. The labor force, you know that the population, we're going to go with 11 million as the population. So you know that the labor force is actually less than half of the population. Now, the figure that I found so shocking is the GDP breakdown. When we look at the GDP per capita, you can see it's half of what the United States. But when we look at the GDP by sector, you can see that agriculture is about 4%, industry is about 18%, but services are 78% of the Greek economy. So, now in my opinion, GDP calculations should probably not even factor most services. Certainly medical services and legal services and many, many other services, these are actually a drain on economies. They don't produce anything, they just take away from production. Now certainly IT infrastructure and other types of services, those services actually add to the economy by making things more efficient. But my guesstimate is at least 50% of the services, which would mean that roughly 40% of the Greek economy is service or a drain on their economy. So let's go over to the trading economic site and look at some of these figures. Remember that roughly half of the labor force is service sector, and only half of the population is in the labor force. So the first thing we want to look at is the government debt to GDP. You can see that the Greek government debt to GDP is exploding, and it's gone completely out of control. I really don't know why the Eurozone has decided to try to save Greece. We're going to look at an article in a bit here that talks about the bankers and Goldman Sachs and their involvement in accounting fraud for the Greek entry into the Eurozone. But before we do that, I wanted to look at some of the figures for Greece. Now, they have a chart here of the unemployment rate, and we'll take that back to 1998. So you can see that the unemployment rate in Greece has absolutely skyrocketed. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that's because of this, that's because of that. So before we dig into that, I wanted to take you back to the main trading economics site and show you, because they have a world breakdown of all countries, and then you can sort them based upon these figures. Now, people will say, well, that's because they're in a recession, or it's because the such and such circumstances, etc. They'll talk about a lot of things. But if you look at the jobless rate, let's sort these countries by jobless rate. So you have these countries in the world, and there's quite a few of them. Let's look at them here. We've got Qatar, Thailand, Singapore, Vietnam, South Korea, Malaysia, Hong Kong. Then we get Switzerland and Norway. Then we get Mongolia, Austria, Denmark, and China. And we're talking about a jobless rate of virtually zero up to about 4%, which, give or take, people moving in and out of the labor force, it's possible that it's really full employment in a lot of these countries. So the question you have to ask is why? Why do certain countries have full employment, and why do other countries have virtual ridiculous unemployment rates? Let's flip it and look. Namibia, Macedonia, Rwanda, Angola, South Africa, Nigeria, Spain, and Greece. There's your top 10, followed up with Botswana and Mozambique. Now, clearly, we know that these African economies, because of the horrific dictatorships that they've suffered for decades, have virtually no economy at all. And we have Macedonia, which is very closely related to Greece, and then we have Greece right here at 20% unemployment rate. So it's my contention that it's not a matter of misfortune, it's not a matter of luck or coincidence, it's a matter of the type of system that you have. These countries in Asia, such as Singapore and Vietnam and South Korea and Malaysia and Hong Kong, I don't know what the number is of government employees that they have, of people that actually live off of tax money. But my guess is it is a very, very, very low number, and you can see the corresponding jobless rate. So I'm going to take you over to the, I think is it the Blaze that has this? Yeah, this is Glenn Beck's site. Not that I'm a Glenn Beck fan, but I found this article on his site. This is an article about the layoffs begin for the public employees in Greece. Now, what I wanted to point out to you is that they actually cite this figure here. Now, you remember I said that the population in Greece is 11 million, but the actual workforce is less than 5. And this article is telling us that they have a 750,000 strong public sector. So that means you have 5 million people or so who work in Greece, and 750,000 of those people work for the government. That's between 15 and 20% of the labor force are actually people who work for the government. That is clearly unsustainable. And obviously I don't agree with technocrats and the rest, but the reason the technocrats are coming in is because Greece has gotten itself into a unstable, unworkable, and impossible situation. So, just to sum up, because I have a lot of things to cover, but I don't have the time, so I'm going to go ahead and sum up. These riots that you're seeing in Greece, in my opinion, are government workers rioting and committing violence because they know they're going to be cut off. I think the same thing is probably going to happen in the United States. I think we've gone too far down the road of socialism, and we have to cut back. It's going to end in a collapse, or it's going to end in a cutback. Ron Paul has promised that he will cut $1 trillion from the budget. And that needs to be done. There are entire departments of the government that need to be eliminated. I think Ron Paul has named a number of them. He could probably start with the Department of Homeland Security. That's one that probably needs to go outright. But there's a whole bunch of departments of the government that just need to be simply eliminated so that we can become a balanced economy again, where the producers are actually able to afford the costs of all the people that are riding in this cart who are not really producing anything. And obviously Greece has gone way, way, way beyond the point of no return. And they probably should just simply exit the euro and declare bankruptcy and start over again, much like Iceland did. They'd probably be much better off if they did that. And we'll talk to you next time.